Bugatti's CEO stood in front of cameras and called it impossible. Not risky, not inadvisable, not something he would recommend against, but flat out impossible. A crashed Chiron per sport, written off by its insurer, carrying a salvage title, sitting in the hands of a man operating without factory authorization, without a manufacturer willing to supply a single part, and without documentation of any kind from the people who assembled it. That declaration came 14 months ago, and the car those words were meant to bury now sits at 90% complete, with the W16 firing, the gearbox engaging through every gear, and 6 specific tasks standing between Matt Armstrong and a road-legal Bugatti on a public road. Those 6 tasks are what this video covers, in order, what each one involves, where it could break down, and what passing actually looks like. That is the premise, and it does not need any build-up beyond that. Before that list though, the 90% already done deserves its own accounting because 14 months of breakthroughs collapse quickly when the remaining work fills the frame and the finish line sits close enough to touch. The car arrived as a salvage wreck that Bugatti said could only be addressed at their authorized facility. Every parts request got refused. Documentation was withheld. Manufacturer support was zero across every stage of this automotive engineering project. What the rebuild produced instead was a W16 that started on the first crank, a gearbox that shifts cleanly through every gear, a chassis leg rebuilt by Bob that reads as factory, and a supercar that moved under its own power in a private garage. The interior finished by E3 Customs sits at a standard they describe as completely repaired, with purple and white leather running across split seats, laser-cut airbag covers installed, Audi airbags fitted with Aston Martin explosive charges, and every seatbelt reset with fresh explosives. Bob's fabricated radiators, built from Honda Civic cores with custom machine fittings, sit in position with hoses connected and mounting brackets bolted down. The monocoque was split, the chassis was repaired, and the car was reunited. The thing Bugatti's CEO declared impossible in a garage was completed in a garage, running, shifting, and waiting on 6 tasks to become road legal. What follows is the final chapter, and none of it carries the weight of what this build already overcame. The impossible part is finished. Task 1 is the radiator leak, and the diagnosis matters here because it defines the nature of the fix entirely. Bob's fabricated radiator assemblies, built from scratch using Honda Civic cores and custom machine fittings, were pressure tested after installation, and a leak appeared during that test, audible and locatable, coming from one of the Bob-built units. This was not a fabrication failure. Transit damage caught the assembly during transport to the car, and a small breach opened in the core material as a result. Bob built these radiators from the ground up, which means he knows the exact material composition, the correct filler rod, and precisely where the breach sits within the structure. The radiator comes out, travels to his machine shop, and the weld closes the breach to a standard that a follow-up pressure test confirms as sound. Hours, not days. The delay between this task and everything that follows is logistical rather than technical, but until that pressure test passes, coolant cannot enter the system, and without coolant, the test that delivers the verdict on 14 months of decisions cannot happen. Task 2 is the coolant fill and temperature test, and it carries more weight than any single moment in the entire automobile restoration, partly because of something that happened before this fill was ever planned. The Chiron runs 40 liters of coolant distributed across 10 radiators and multiple separate circuits covering the W16 engine, the charge cooler circuit serving the turbos, gearbox oil cooling, and the battery system. Filling it correctly demands a vacuum procedure to purge air from every circuit before coolant enters, because an air pocket sitting in the wrong location does not absorb heat the way coolant does. What it does instead is create a localized hotspot, a section of the internal combustion engine where temperatures climb while everything around it reads within normal range and under sustained load that damages seals, degrades gaskets, and overheats bearings in ways that build on each other over time. Bob is traveling to Miami specifically to perform this fill because this engine, carrying this particular history, needs the most trusted person in the room present when coolant enters the system for the first time. The history is that Alex drove the car without coolant during an early test run, not briefly, and the question of what damage that produced has sat without an answer ever since. 3 simultaneous readings deliver the verdict. The temperature gauge gets watched from startup because rising to normal operating range and holding there means the cooling system is performing as built, and continuing past that range means something is restricting flow or an air pocket occupies a critical location. The oil dipstick comes out after the first warm-up cycle, because clean oil reads as normal and anything milky or creamy means coolant crossed a barrier and a seal or gasket has already failed. The overflow reservoir gets monitored through the warm-up because sustained bubbling after the thermostat opens means combustion gases are pushing through a head gasket, and that is the most serious outcome this test can produce. 3 readings, roughly 30 minutes from a cold start, and everything this build has accumulated over 14 months either holds or it does not. The evidence that it holds is real and grounded in specifics. A W16 that starts on the first crank carries compression across all 16 cylinders, and healthy compression at that first start moment means the head gaskets were sealing correctly after full reassembly, after the car had been sitting through the entire rebuild process, after every decision in this project was already made and committed to. Clean idle running through that same first start showed no signs of combustion disruption. These are not guarantees, but they are positive indicators pointing in one direction. And if any reading comes back with a problem, this team addresses it because every problem this rebuild has generated has been solved before moving forward. Task 3 is paint and body panels, and the order here is deliberate rather than incidental. Several exterior panels remain missing or held in a temporary condition, and the rear section, bumper panels, and trim all need full assembly before the car looks finished. Paint cannot go on a vehicle that may need mechanical work afterward, because paint applied before an engine-out head gasket repair does nothing but get destroyed and redone. Mechanical completion comes first in every case. Once the coolant fill and temperature test confirm the car is mechanically sound, the exterior transformation begins, and the Chiron that spent 14 months being filmed in partial disassembly finally becomes the finished machine it has been working toward across the entire course of this project. Task 4 is where this stops being a mechanical restoration and becomes a legal one, because a salvage title vehicle rebuilt without manufacturer support using custom fabricated components cannot simply be taken onto a public road after repairs complete. Individual vehicle approval requires a physical inspection against a detailed checklist covering brakes, steering, lighting, emissions, and structural integrity, and 3 specific areas will receive the closest attention from the inspector. The gearbox mounting bracket that Bob welded and reinforced stands as a repaired safety critical component, and the inspector must confirm it meets required standards without any prior knowledge that Bob's repair is stronger than what the factory originally produced. The custom Valvetronic exhaust brings noise and emissions testing directly into the process, with primary catalysts still in and secondary cats removed, and whether that exact configuration meets current standards is a specific technical question the test will answer. The chassis leg Bob rebuilt from scratch and the rejoined monocoque both go through structural assessment against construction standards, and all of that Matt and Bob can document thoroughly and present with confidence going in. What they cannot control is the body control module. Post-crash fault codes sit active in the system, holding it in a degraded operating state, and a car presenting with active fault codes fails an IVA inspection before a single mechanical component gets assessed. Clearing those codes requires Bugatti's proprietary diagnostic system, specifically the Leonardo computer, and that brings the entire situation full circle back to the same car manufacturer that refused every parts request, withheld every piece of documentation, and whose CEO declared this project impossible 14 months ago. What Matt needs is not parts and not documentation. One diagnostic session, enough time connected to that system to clear the post-crash fault state and return everything to correct operating condition. Whether that session comes through an authorized dealer who performs the reset without official endorsement from Bugatti is the last genuinely open question this rebuild carries into its final stage. The legal environment around that question is already changing. The Right to Repair Directive takes effect on July 31st, 2026, with software techniques that impede independent repair directly addressed by the legislation, and a BCM reset that only manufacturer tools can perform sits exactly where that law was written to apply. The documented record of Bugatti's refusals, time-stamped on YouTube and watched by millions across automotive culture and the wider repair community, is precisely the kind of evidence regulators work from when assessing whether manufacturer restrictions serve legitimate safety purposes or function as straight commercial gatekeeping. Matt's rebuild demonstrated beyond any reasonable argument that the capability justification Bugatti offered at every refusal was never valid. A path to that BCM reset exists, the law is actively moving toward it, the evidence is permanent and public, and the community watching this project has grown large enough that Bugatti's continued silence carries a measurable reputational cost with every video that passes. When all 6 tasks are done, the sequence runs like this. Bob welds the breech, the pressure test holds, coolant fills the system, the temperature gauge rises to normal and levels off, the oil comes out clean, the overflow reservoir stays clear through the full warm-up cycle, paint gets applied, panels get fitted, and the Chiron that spent 14 months partially assembled on screen finally looks like the finished machine it has been all along. The IVA inspection evaluates the bracket, the chassis leg, and the exhaust, and the work meets the required standard because it genuinely does meet the required standard. The BCM gets reset through whatever channel produces that outcome. Registration follows, and then a Bugatti Chiron Per Sport drives on a public road with a license plate, with insurance, and with every legal right to occupy that road. The car Bugatti's CEO said could not exist outside their authorized facility will drive past one. The parts that could not be sourced were fabricated. The specifications that were withheld were found independently. The things declared impossible in a garage were completed in a garage. 6 tasks remain. The finish line has a specific shape and a specific order, and the team standing at 90% has already solved a harder version of every problem still ahead of them.